Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh, doing another podcast slash interview with Gary Crotaz and from KultraLab. So um, I've swapped a few emails with Gary, and hey Gary, and and I got to tell you, there's something very fascinating with Gary and his story. We'll get into, and finally, I should say I had to look up Culture Lab because three people kept telling me I had to see what they were doing, and finally I was like, okay, I think it's time to figure it out. So I asked for an introduction, and we've swapped a bunch of emails, and they're doing something super cool that's we can't really talk about yet, but or maybe we can about the Gallup stuff, uh, but it's a very interesting track record. So Gary, just to put things into context here, why don't you tell us a bit about Culture Lab, um, and and what you guys do and what your specialty is, and then it'll help people understand, the rest of the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, first thing to say, Dave, is thank you so much for having me on the podcast to talk about what we're doing at KultraLab. So I'm Chief Coaching Officer of this business, KultraLab. It's a UK-based business, but with global ambitions. So we're currently working with clients in both in the UK and the US markets. And KultraLab is a technology firm that's building a kind of digital coaching app. So it's targeted at large organizations where they've got large groups of employees. So think manufacturers or distribution companies or retailers or food and beverage businesses. And they believe in the power of coaching, but human coaching is a very expensive thing to do to cascade through your organization. So what KultraLab's doing is it's developing an app that brings together technology and behavioral science and the principles of coaching to deliver non-human coaching through the app for all your people in the organization.
Very cool. And there is a tremendous amount, well, I shouldn't say tremendous amount, because I don't want it to seem overwhelming, but there's a lot of customization that goes into the project framework, understanding the needs and identifying the issues and goals and everything before you build it. It's not like you can just go to the app store and download it and off you go, right?
Well, you can go to the App Store and download it,
Well, yeah.
but yeah. So we've built an initial library of content that's primarily targeted around the kind of soft skills and basic management skills of early stage leadership in the workplace. So think active listening, empathic listening, delegation, planning, positive reframing, those kinds of things. And then we'll work with an individual client to understand what their specific needs are around their workforce. So maybe they're going through change, or maybe they're expanding, or maybe they're looking for productivity improvements or better manager-employee conversations, those kinds of things. And then we can pull together for them from the library of content, and even developing bespoke content for the client, different coaching journeys for the users to go through within the Kultra app.
Yeah. So super crazy. So give me run me through verbally through an example of how this might work, or like a deal or a customer that you've had, like what happened. So I know that there's been some fairly phenomenal results, and really from a change management perspective, like off the charts, levels of adoption and things like that. So just run me through. I don't know if you want to use a customer name or not, but a typical example of what people can expect.
For sure. So a good example is we're currently working with a professional services firm in the UK. We're working with multiple clients across different sectors, but this one is in professional services. And so what's very common in professional services, I think, consultancy advisory firms, is people come in as a new graduate and they progress through the firm, and they take on more and more responsibility as they become more senior, as they get their qualifications, all those kinds of things, but often not really developed in terms of management skills. So they become managers of people, managers of teams, managers of projects. but they're never really developed in those kind of soft skills. So we worked with the HR director of this organization. It's a multi-site professional services firm based mainly in central London. And she said, I'm really interested in how this app can support us to develop those soft skills in people. And so we piloted it. This started in autumn. We launched our minimum viable product back in autumn of 2022. And we started with a relatively small trial, and very quickly people started to say, this is really interesting because it's on my phone, it's in my time, I can choose what I'm doing. So in the best principles of coaching, it's with the employee to choose what they do. They can align it with their own personal development goals. And we had a conversation with them a couple of weeks ago, and they've now decided, on the basis of the positive results in that pilot, to scale it up through the course of this year to their entire organization. So not just to those junior and early stage managers, but also right up into the senior management structure of the organization. And that's really interesting. You know, I've done a lot of work over the years with Gallup on Clifton Strengths. And with Clifton Strengths, it's the same kind of thing, that it can be deployed from the front line up to the C-suite. And we believe that whilst the sort of core target group that's most going to benefit from this kind of approach is that preparing for management for the first time, supervisors, early stage managers, building those soft skills, actually there's an awful lot in the app that over time can support people at lots of different levels in the organization.
Yeah, it really is very fascinating how the younger folks in the workplace, the X's and Y's, they'd rather be on their phone, you know, doing this at self-paced than physical meetings or conversations. You know, I have a stepkid that's in fourth year university, and everything's done online. His whole life is online, and it's amazing. The kid's brilliant, but it's amazing how just the learning styles are completely different. So and I've worked with another company that's that has some leadership and follow-up work leveraging an app, and the usage as far as connecting with the app after whatever leadership development training they went on is higher. They get an option if they want a physical or a person call them to do learning reinforcement, or they want to use the app. And so the level of participation afterwards is actually higher using the app than it is having a person booked in your calendar in the set time. So
I think that's
amazing.
right. And in this TikTok generation where everybody's used to really, really short form learning content, or YouTube, you know, we've taken from that. So we're creating little micro learnings and micro actions in the journey. So what you're going through, if you're starting on, let's say one of the themes in that's really common early theme for people to get into is about observing. So it's developing the skill to observe what's going on around you in the workplace, with your team, with people around you, but observing without judgment. So that's the fundamental sort of skill and capability that you're developing. Going through the initial learning content that you might do, say on a Monday at the beginning of the week, will take you just 5 to 10 minutes to work your way through that content. And there's some story, and there's an article, and there's a little quiz, and we're going to over time build more and more different formats of content in, so maybe audio or video coming in over time. And then you set a commitment for the week. So you say, I'm going to practice this observing without judgment. So observing what's going on around me, ask myself some questions, noting down what I notice and noting down what I can do differently in future. And I'm going to practice that every day. And I'm going to get a notification on my phone at 10 in the morning to remind myself to do my practice for the day. And when I've done my practice, like with all of these other kind of fitness apps and, you know, language apps, you go back into the app and you say, I've done my practice, I'm building my streak. And we're seeing that really, really good engagement with people into that way of learning, because it's just a very small part of your day. It's not I need an hour. It's not I need half a day. And it's just repeated micro actions, micro learnings. And you're building the behavioral science of habit formation over time. And that's what we want to do. We want to build little components that come together as you go through observing, then you go through active listening, and then you go through positive reframing, and you go through something else. Then you're going to be building the skill set of a rounded coach style manager. That's what we're looking for in our organizations.
Oh, that's super cool. Okay, so the question that I've been wanting to ask you for the longest time and been biting my tongue since is, how did you get here, and what's your background before you became the chief coaching guru there?
Well, I've had a very eclectic background, but eventually came to coaching. So I'm myself an ICF accredited executive coach, and I deliver human coaching alongside the work that I do with KultraLab. Along the way, I've been many things. I started training in medicine. So I was a trained medical doctor here in the UK, did a PhD. Then I spent 10 years in strategy consulting and eventually decided I should get a proper job, spend about 7 years in retail. So I was in executive leadership in a couple of global retail businesses. And then decided to take up a portfolio career. So I've seen leadership and management from many, many different angles. And I was in one of those executive leadership roles right at the start of the pandemic, actually. And seeing an organization have to transition from in-person to remote leadership, it really tests the skills and capabilities of the leaders in the organization, particularly around how do you manage an uncertainty? How do you manage in a high stress environment? How do you manage when life and work is just harder than it's ever been before? To be effective, to be productive, to be profitable, that's tough. And that's stretching our leaders more than ever before. And so it's something that I really like to do in my own coaching. And then I'm fascinated to see coming through now in the Kultra app, taking that development, sort of objective and saying, well, this is not just for the C-suite. This is not just for the senior leadership in the organization who can have human coaching. Human coaching, of course, is an incredibly powerful thing for an organization if delivered really effectively. But to say, well, but what about everybody else in the organization? How can this get right through the organization? And when I first met KultraLab, what was fascinating to me was that they're taking amazing technology, and we've got some brilliant technologists who've worked for huge, highly scaled tech businesses in the past. So people like Visa and MindGym and Booking.com, those kind of organizations, that's where our teams come from. And then we've got brilliant behavioral scientists, which are helping us to really get the nudges right and the timing right, so that as you go through this journey, it delivers this habit forming action. And then more than anything else that's really important to me is that we hold true to the principles and the ethics and the confidentiality of coaching. So, we believe, like in coaching, that the person in front of you holding the app is capable of making that change, regardless of their educational background, regardless of the role they play. We're giving them a tool, and that's the feedback we're getting from the people that are holding the app. They're saying, this is for me. I can just go in and find something I'd like to work on, and I can just pick that and work on it. I don't need somebody's permission. I don't need funding from my organization to go on a training course. I can develop myself. And that's what I think is really impactful for me, that I really like, with the journey we're on with KultraLab.
Yeah, and where traditional coaching really fails is it hits the highest levels in an organization, and very rarely, nobody coaches their entire organization.
I mean, we're expensive.
Yeah. I was going to say it's not cost prohibitive, but it's but who knows? I don't think it's ever been tested as far as the whole organization. But the reality is it's usually the top executives, and so if you're especially if it's built around a program or an initiative, which is something that you guys really specialize in, how are you going to get the messaging down to everybody if everybody doesn't have access to it to some degree, right?
It's exactly right. And I think that, we believe very strongly that culture is most effective in an organization when it is a part of a holistic talent management program. So you should have human coaching in the more senior levels of the organization, maybe in parallel with culture. So it's absolutely possible that there could be more senior managers who have both a monthly human coaching session, and then day to day, week to week, they're working through almost their homework on the app. But then you've also got your mentoring program that should be in place. And you've also got your training, your induction, and your ongoing technical and skills-based training. And you've also got great performance management by leaders in the organization. Very commonly when I talk to organizations, it's still true, less and less, but it's still very common, the people think of coaching and they say, oh, I coach people who need fixing. I coach somebody who hasn't got the skills and they need to get the skills. I say, no, you train the people that haven't got the skills and need the skills. You mentor the people that need to navigate the politics of the organization. You coach people to be able to maximize their potential. And everybody should be coached. Everybody should be coached. In particular, the people that you really want to hold on to, at all levels in the organization. And the way we structure what we do is we price it according to the level of the person. So if you're giving the app to somebody on the shop floor or the warehouse floor, which absolutely you can do with Kultra, you're paying an amount for that individual that is relative to the benefit you're going to get as an organization from that person improving their performance by a few percentage points. If you give it into the hands of a senior leader that you might be paying 6 figures a year for, well, then you'll be paying a level that is appropriate for their level. And that kind of sliding scale of pricing helps us to be able to reach everybody in the organization. We're currently talking to... I wasn't
aware of that. That's a very cool model, actually.
Yeah. We're currently talking to one of the largest retailers in the UK who has well over 100,000 employees. And we're talking to them about a scaled path that would eventually get it to everybody in the organization. So that would be every member of shop floor could have this app over time. And that's really important to us because the philosophy of why KultraLab was created was to extend coaching to reach all the people who can benefit from it. And that's everybody in the organization.
Yeah. So Gary, you did a really good job at avoiding my next question. Okay. Did you practice medicine or not?
I didn't practice medicine. I spent 8 years in medical school. I was on the wards. I helped in operating theatres. And then I got into my late 20s and I suddenly figured out this isn't for me. And it probably took me 7 years longer than it should have done to figure out this isn't for me. But I think that's been my principle through my career, that once you figure out the right path for you, then you got to go for it. And for me, that's the journey I'm on today.
And so the follow-up question is, do your parents still talk to you?
They still do. They took a while when they said, so what are you going to do if not medicine? And I said, there's this thing called strategy consulting. And they said, I have no idea what that is. And I think 10 years later, they still didn't really understand that world that I was in. Once I got into retail and I worked for a business called Mothercare, which is similar to Babies R Us in the US. And they were like, oh, right, okay. We've got a Mothercare bucket in our kitchen. So we now understand what you do for a job. So yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, hey, you got to follow your passion. You're clearly good at what you do, right? So you're right. Too bad it took you so long to figure it. But they're all lessons along the way. So I know that when we've talked, you said that you're working on a few programs or sort of road mapping a couple things. Are those things that you're comfortable sort of talking about, or are they?
Yeah. So we work with, so KultraLab is the business, Kultra is the app, spelled Kultra. And Kultra can deploy in a variety of different situations. So some examples of specific situations that we're currently working with clients on. We're working with a high-tech energy firm where they are similarly trying to develop the leadership skills of their team, but in the context of a very, very high growth business where they've got people from very, very different backgrounds. So they've got full-on engineers, they've got sort of people with a management and finance type background. They've got people with a very operational background. And part of what they're doing is trying to bring the team together and gel the team across multiple different sites, multiple different locations. So one of the things in the Kultra app is that as well as the ability to develop yourself with these coaching journeys, you've also got community in the app. So you can chat with anybody else in your organization on the app, in individual chat or in group chat and so on. And so they can create champions and sponsors for the initiative that help bring people together. There's another use case we're working on, which is about apprentices coming into the organization. So the apprentices come in together. They're going into a particular organization where the average age of employees is probably 20 to 30 years older than them. And after they've done their initial training, they all get sent into all these locations around the country, and they might be the only apprentice on their site. So they're using the app both to develop the apprentices, but to keep them together as one cohort. We're working on a really fascinating project in the US together with two organizations. One's called Leading Points and the other one's called AirPass, where we're creating a new instance of the app, which is called the Military Career Coach. So we're taking the platform of Kultra, which is about these coaching journeys, but then what we're doing is we're working with experts in military career transition. So people that have worked in the military and they're coming out of the military and they're going into civilian organizations. Now, we know how amazing those people can be in a civilian organization because of all the skills, all the experience that they've gained within the military context. One of the areas that's a really significant challenge in transition is moving from that command and control structure of the military into a more, you might call it sort of democratic style of leadership within a normal civilian corporate environment or maybe a government kind of role. And so we're going to be working with specialists in specifically that military career transition to create US-centric and military-centric content, so appropriate stories, appropriate articles. And we're currently working with that organization to get sponsorship for military veterans across the US who are going to be given access to this app for a year and to help them in transition. And there's a website which is militarycareercoach.net. You can go to that website and you can see much more about this huge initiative that we're trying to get off the ground at the moment with the team at Leading Points.
That was, I think, the third person that told me I should talk to you. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad the word's getting around.
Yeah, right. And so but very a total instance, right? Like, here's the problem, and effectively you went, okay, yeah, that's no big deal. It's the same philosophy as we're doing. We need to educate, give people the tools that they can, manage to adapt, change, whatever it is. It's just a different content library.
Right. The beauty of the platform is we've designed it to be highly, highly modular. So you might be an organization where your issues that you're trying to resolve can be addressed with the, if you like, standalone standard content in the app. So we've got a whole suite of content. We've probably got about a business book's worth of content on what we call building better managers. There's 55 different modules of content across a breadth of different subjects, and also level 1, level 2, level 3. So you can go from beginner to intermediate to advanced in a particular area in your practice. We're just about to launch some really fascinating new content, which is about inclusive behaviors. So for organizations that are trying to build their diversity and inclusive characteristics within the organization, it's things like your practice in the week might be recognizing your biases, or it might be role modeling inclusive behaviors, those kinds of things. So for a lot of organizations, they're going to be able to take that content and deploy it in their organization straight away. There'll be larger organizations where they might have a particular language that they use, a particular turn of phrase that they use. And so we can amend the content just for them within their organization to say, actually, the story here should relate to your wider program of change, for example. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we've got these different modules. So you've got stories, you've got articles, you've got quizzes, you've got different types of things. And then this practice. If you're sitting there going, I've got an amazing idea of what I can do in my organization, then we can create bespoke content just for you, and it's delivered just to you. No other client can see that content. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing for the US military instance. We'll be working with a team to create something that's just in their style.
Very cool. Yeah, I know. So I worked with a company that was doing some things around, or with Gallup, Clifton Strengths, and so it's not too hard to put 2 and 2 together what your product will look like there. But for those folks that aren't too familiar with Gallup, they have I think over 30 million people have went through and done their assessment now. There's probably 30,000 worldwide coaches that either coaches or train the trainer people that have gone through that. Some for the certification. I think they have a yearly conference in Nebraska that pulls in like 10,000 folks that focus on that Gallup. So it's or the Clifton Strength. So it's quite the big organization, really, when you think of all the tentacles that reach out and touch people. So
sure. I've had a very close relationship with Gallup for a long time. I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach, and I use Clifton Strengths with all of my own coachees that I work with privately. And I do a podcast actually in the US called Coacharium, which is for leaders who coach, and I work with a couple of US based strengths coaches to do that podcast. I think that Gallup's a good example of an organization where they've got amazing products and they've got amazing research, and it's really the underpinning of why coaching works, because coaching drives engagement and behavior change, and engagement, proven by Gallup in huge studies, drives business performance, commercial business performance. And so I think that potentially in time, there's an opportunity for you to take the kinds of things that Gallup's doing and translate it into digital journeys that people can not only do an assessment or a course, but then over a period of time, they can then continue to engage in that kind of material. And I think that this is true for many organizations that run things like psychometric assessments. The challenge is, what do you do after you've done the course? What do you do after you've done the test? How do you really embed it in the organization? I work very closely with a coach in the US called Dana Williams, who's based down in Dallas. And she used to be the marketing director at Southwest Airlines. And she was pivotal to having Gallup fully implemented in Southwest Airlines, from cabin crew through to C-suite, in terms of use of strengths. And it's fascinating talking to her how rich their embedding program needed to be to get strengths, fully strengths-based organization. It was the first fully strengths-based organization that Gallup built. And it plays back to the point of, culture. It could be a really pivotal component of that kind of program. On its own, it'll be helpful, but where it's really effective is when the organization looks at its whole program of how it develops its people. When I was an executive strategy director in large retail businesses, and people have said to me, a few years on, they say, looking back, do you regret anything, or would you make any different decisions now, given what you know now? And I said, I'd make one. I worked in crisis retail for a long, long time. So retailers that were really, really struggling, closing a lot of stores, losing a lot of money. And we were pulling every lever we could to reduce costs and to optimize productivity, to squeeze what we could out of the business. And of course, in that environment, the first thing that gets cut is the training budget, because it's for the future. And, you can get away for a period of time without a training budget, and the business sort of doesn't change. And then when you keep doing that month after month, year after year, it does start to change. And I said, when I looked at the Gallup data that said, if you go from bottom quartile to top quartile engagement, metrics for business performance, whether it's turnover, like turnover in the organization, or productivity or customer loyalty, increase between 10 and 20%. And I sat there and went, we were pulling all these other commercial levers to squeeze out 1% or 2%. And if we'd stepped back and bitten the bullet and invested in our people, then we could have got an order of magnitude larger impact on our organization potentially. That's the thing that I wish I'd had the evidence and the knowledge then to be able to push that more strongly. At the time, I didn't have those data points to hand that could really push back when everybody else said, we've got to cut every cost. Training's one of them. It wasn't the only cost. It was one of many, many costs that we had to cut. Now I think, investing in your people almost comes top of the list, particularly in a world of such great uncertainty. The playbook that used to work time and time again in many, many industries just doesn't work anymore. Do the things you used to do. It used to be highly profitable, highly effective. Now no more.
Yeah, it was funny. I was on a conversation last week, and they were talking about, the potential turnover, that is sort of, illuminating, right, some sort of downturn economy. And, they were saying how, coaching and training's going to take a real hit, and I said, yeah, I don't think it should though. Right, because and you're employing, because you have to keep your employee engagement up, because if you drop 10% of your workforce, you got a lot of people that are going to be doing different jobs or additional jobs. And how do you keep that smile on their face? Like your business is going to go along as normal. It's not like, you're just going to have 10% less sales, right? You're going to have to step up, and you want to make sure that you have the right people. It's not just about downsizing, right? It's about keeping the right people engaged because they're taking on bigger responsibilities. So,
The reason that we're using coaching in the Kultra app is because coaching is ultimately the most powerful people intervention I think you can make. Because if you're leaning into training, well, that's a one-off. And no organization's got the money or the time to continually pull people out, bring them together, fly them across the country to come into training sessions to learn more. And when they do learn more, a week later, they've forgotten half of it. That's the forgetting curve in your brain. That's the data just seeping away. Performance management, well, that's important. And you've got to have good performance management. But ultimately, in the best organizations, you don't need a huge amount of performance management because you trust your people, you've picked people, you've developed them, you put them in an environment where they can succeed. You shouldn't be needing to performance manage them. Coaching is the opportunity to pull the organization back on the catapult and let it fly. I was talking recently to Gary Rich, who is a leading coach in the US, used to be the CEO and chairman of WD-40 company and often on stages in major conferences in the US talking about leadership. And his organization, they took away the word manager and replaced it with coach. And they said, if you manage people, your job title is coach. And your job is to deliver servant leadership. So to set them up for success. And once you set them up for success, to get out of their way and to do your best to remove everything that is in their way to enable them to succeed. And so that for me was what was so exciting about the approach with Kultra, that, it's an interesting intellectual challenge, which I wrote a book before I came to KultraLab, which was a self-coaching book. So it's a book that invites you to ask yourself questions and to write the answers in the pages. When I came to KultraLab and they said, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put something in the hands of people that not only tells them stuff, it's not really about the telling them. It's about now reflect on, in your situation, what resonates for you? How would you take this forward? What would you do next? How would you know that you've done it? All in the best style of coaching. Human coaching is powerful. But you don't need, my view is you don't need a human coach to get an awful lot of the benefit. There's a recent study looking at weight loss coaching, actually, and they gave some people human coaching and they gave some people a kind of weight loss coaching app. And the people with the app got half of the benefit of people that had the human coaching. And the human coaching businesses went, that's amazing. Human coaching wins. It's better than the digital propositions. I looked at it and went, the app probably costs 10% or less of the human coaching, and you're getting half the benefit for probably 10% of the cost. That's where Kultra is. So the data, Kultra is too early to yet have data on the impact on turnover, although I expect it to be reasonably significant and particularly significant for its cost. If you look at some of the digital coaching platforms now that are delivering human coaches through an app on your phone, they're reporting between circa 20 and 35% reduction in turnover in organizations. Now, to your point of, does coaching pay for itself? It massively pays for itself if you've got an effective coaching solution in place and you've got great coaches delivering the work. And that's what I think about Kultra too. There's an awful lot of not great coaching out there, but really, really effective coaching. You shouldn't be saying, what's my learning and development budget? And can I squeeze in a little bit of extra to pilot 100 people on an app? You should be saying, the app will pay for itself, because the amount of money it costs us on people leaving the organization. So take a retailer, for example. The average cost of a leaver within a retail store is somewhere between $3,000 and $20,000, depending on whether it's somebody on the till or it's the store manager, that kind of order of magnitude. That's probably about 2/3 of the annual cost of many of those people in the organization. Corn Ferry put some data out for more senior leaders in a head office environment. And they said, actually, if a senior manager leaves within 6 to 12 months of starting their role, it's of the order of 2.4 times their base salary it costs you,
Right.
because the cost of recruitment, the cost of induction, the cost of lost productivity, because it takes a senior manager, some significant time to start adding value in the organization. And you suddenly say, well, on any measure, the cost of human coaching or the cost of a daily coaching style app is trivial. If I avoid 1 or 2 or 3 levers in my whole organization, then it's going to pay for the program. And that's what we're finding with the clients we're starting to work with. They see from the anecdotal feedback, followed by the data starting to come through, people are using the app, people are finding it really interesting, they're finding it really helpful to move themselves forward. And it should drive through engagement scores and reduce turnover.
Yeah, amazing with the, my first, I've told the story before, but my first day on the job in HR, I had a breakfast meeting with Dr. Jack Fitzens, right? Who, some people call him the grandfather of analytics or human capital metrics, right? And it just made so much sense when he was talking about how everything, fits together, and how, one McDonald's down the street, same footprint, but one could flip through senior managers like crazy, and overall the profitability is different. Make total sense. But for some reason, and the shame to say this, 25 years later, human HR still struggles with those metrics, right? And they're not doing themselves any justice when they can't come up with those actual stats to show their CFOs and see in the C-suite and say, look, if we do this, we'll get this. Right? So
I spent 10 years being a consultant on a spreadsheet and probably being quite annoying going into clients, and people thought, well, what does he know? And they were probably right. And then I went to work for a retailer, and I eventually became in a role where I was running the UK store estate. So I had a reporting into me through a pyramid of probably about of the order of 4,000 people across about 170 sites across the UK. And the most I ever learned was traveling to a quite far-flung part of the country and going and sitting for 2 or 3 hours in the staff room of the store. And you sit down with a senior supervisor or the store manager, and you'd say, well, how are you getting on with achieving your goals for the store? And they said, Gary, I can't tell you how much time it's taking just to recruit. I'm constantly managing people who are leaving the organization, managing recruiting new people, managing inducting new people. By the time I've inducted them, they're leaving again, and we have to start the cycle again. So I don't have 5 days a week managing the store. I have a day a week managing the store and 4 days a week managing the churn. So it's not just the cost of the churn, it's the cost of lost productivity of everybody else who's managing that churn. And I hadn't appreciated from, back in the ivory tower of consulting or head office, what it really means in these organizations. We went through a program of quite intensive performance improvement across the business. And we pulled lots and lots of different levers, and we did lots and lots of studies and tests in stores to see whether layout impacted or price impacted or range impacted, whatever it was. Hands down, the most impactful thing you could do to impact the like-for-likes of a retail store was switch out the store manager and put in one of your top store managers who came into the same store with the same availability crisis and the same prices and the same teams. And the like-for-like could go up 10% in a retail business where 1% is pretty amazing.
right.
And you say, well, what have you done differently? And they said, well, the teams weren't talking to the customers. That was the start. It wasn't that they didn't know the product. It was that they weren't talking to the customers. Now they are. And surprise, surprise, we start to sell more stuff. And again, it's about the people. We're working currently with a construction business. We're working with a business in food and beverage. we're working with this high-tech energy business, and sometimes bringing the human coaching in as well as the digital coaching. And it's very interesting to see that for the teams to be able to have the time to spend even 5 minutes on their phone on the app. Of course, in many organizations, be sitting on your phone is frowned upon, because that's you're probably playing Candy Crush or something like that. Actually here, so sometimes we're doing some human coaching with senior leadership just to create a little bit of that coaching culture, to say it's okay that you allow people to choose what they'd like to do. You don't have to tell them all the time. And when you say, even though you may have an opinion in your head as to what they should be doing, but you say, well, what do you want to be doing in order to achieve your development goals? Suddenly, and we're seeing this through the app, it's changing the conversation in the organization as well as the actual skills.
It becomes a conversation, right?
Right.
And rather than just do this, right? It shows interest, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gary, run me through here. How do I know if I'd be a good fit for what you guys do? Right? So give me a real live business scenario that's happening that you go, oh yeah, we could help you guys easy.
So the most common one, and the one that I'm talking to an awful lot of businesses around at the moment, is we've got an engagement problem, we've got a management problem, and it's costing us a lot of money. And we know that. We don't necessarily quantify that, but we know that's a problem. And we're losing good people. Can you help? That's the most common one. And what it comes down to very often in those organizations is that in crisis, in a pace of growth or just that uncertainty of the workplace at the moment, people are being promoted into supervisory roles or into management roles because they were good at the last role. And nobody's got the time or often the money to develop them through. And everybody's running at 1,000 miles an hour and everyone's a bit burned out. And that's just built on top of the impacts of the pandemic and everything else that's going on at the moment. And everybody's stressed between their work life and their home life. And so organizations need something that is simple and quick to deploy across the whole organization that will just start to move the dial in terms of that management capability. That's the case that I'm working on with a client at the moment, is to say, I'm helping them think about, with the team, their whole coaching culture, starting with, we don't really understand what this coaching thing is. We thought that we should be deploying coaching and maybe your coaching app to people who are failing. And I said, no, you should deploy it to anybody preparing to manage their first direct report, anybody particularly in their first 1 or 2 years of management, but actually on into more senior levels, anybody who's preparing for promotion, anybody who's in their new role in the first 1 or 2 years of the new role. And suddenly you open it out because there's no human coach in the app, the cost of Kultra is of the order of 10%, probably a bit less than 10% of the cost of the digital coaching apps with a human coach. And another order of magnitude cheaper than private one-to-one coaching. I'm a great fan of organizations like Roche, the pharma company, where they've got a very extensive internal coaching program, and everybody who manages somebody has access to an internal coach. So it's a member of the senior leadership team who's been given some coaching training, and it's not going to cost as much as external coaching, but it's still going to add a huge amount of value. What I'd like to see is those kind of organizations then saying, well, between your coaching sessions, I think that you could be working on assessing your biases, or you could be working on, delegating, or you could be working on prioritization, or you could be working on your observation skills. And it can be tied in a really effective organization to the development goals set through the regular performance review. So if you've got a 6-monthly performance review, you know what that particular manager needs to work on. You've got a suite of 55 different modules of content and more if we've done some bespoke for you. And their manager can be saying, well, over the next 6 months, here's 10 areas that you could focus in on. And week after week, they can work their way through the 10. And by the time they come back to their next performance review, they will have learned something. They will have gained deep self-awareness. They'll start to practice new habits. One of the most pleasing pieces of feedback that we received from one of our pilot clients was actually not from the individual, it was from the people around them. And they said, the impact that we were hoping to see over 3 to 6 months, we've seen in just a few weeks. And I couldn't spot the specific behavior that they're doing differently. They're just more self-aware, they're more thoughtful, they're more mindful with the team. And really, that's the process for me in coaching. Yes, it's about practicing behaviors and it's about building habits over time, but it's also simply the awareness. You read a story and in your head, because it's private, just you, nobody's tracking you, nobody's feeding this back to your employer, you're looking at this content and going, actually, that might be me. And that's okay. And you don't have to tell anybody. And that's what this should feel like. It should feel like your personal coach to help you think through, your style of leadership. Even with a human coach, there are some things that people are just not comfortable to say. In a conversation as a coach, sometimes I might say to the person, I'm going to ask you a really pokey question. You might find this really uncomfortable to think about. Don't feel you have to tell me the answer, but I would like you to think about it in your head. And then you see them thinking and you see them finding that clarity. And then you just say, that's enough. We don't need to do more with that. But now you've had some thinking that's moved you forward a bit. And I think, we've created this content in Kultra to be like that for people that they can reflect in their own time and they can choose what they do with it. It's in their own hands.
That's very cool. And so like you had mentioned that you like larger customers, enterprise customers. How long does it take before, if you're into a 5,000 person organization, what's typical rollout times? And
Sure. So at this stage, we would start engaging with senior stakeholders in the organization. So that would typically be the chief people officer, maybe members of the learning development team, but also all other members of the senior leadership, because often what Kultra is doing is it's solving the problems that other people are seeing, and it should be paying for itself in what you're doing. And then we're looking to set up an initial pilot, which would typically be of the order of 100 to 200 people probably, that we would put onto the app. And they might be across different locations. They might be in different parts of the organization. So the large retailer we're about to go into pilot with, part of it is with their technology organization. Part of it is with their stores, retail organizations. They're doing 2 pilots in one. That pilot probably needs to run for 1 to 2 months. We're seeing in our early pilots, and we've been piloting since autumn last year, we're seeing that they know pretty much straight away. Within a week or 2, people are coming back to them and saying, I really like this. It's helping me to do something I just couldn't do before. I haven't received this kind of development before. And so we're finding clients, even before more of the formal data starts to come through, they know that it's going to have an impact on engagement. It's going to have an impact on performance, particularly for those managers. And of course, if you impact the manager, then you impact all the people that report into them too. So you get this cascaded impact across the organization. And then, for a 5,000 person organization, well, we've just gone from a pilot of 3 and we're scaling up over the next 4 to 5 months into 300 people in this professional services business. I would say that to scale up to 5,000 would take, the shortest would probably be about 6 months up to 12 months. To launch somebody on the app is very, very quick and easy. It's a plug and play type of app. So you get an email link. So you can only log in if your organization is paying for it. It's B2B only. You get an email link. You download the app. You log in with your special link, and you're in. And there's a little onboarding process. There's a little tour of the app, and then you can start to use it. And of course, you're connected in through the community functions. What we do alongside the app is we help the organization build a proper change program. So it's not just have the app and off you go, good luck.
Yeah.
We create champions in the organizations. We find people who like this kind of stuff. They're used to using these kind of apps. They're interested in people developing, and they become the champions. You've got a senior sponsor, and we want as soon as possible over the first sort of 3 months or so with the app for the business to become really self-sufficient with it. So they're running it. KultraLab doesn't run it for them. They're taking it on themselves. We see in some of our clients, they'll go once a month everybody in the whole cohort, in the 100 people, they're all going to do the same one together. So we're all going to do coaching style of leadership, for example. That's one of the really interesting modules in there. So it's talking about the GROW model of coaching. So everybody in the cohort can do that together. They can all share their learnings, share their experiences, and then they go off the next 3 weeks doing things that are suited to their own individual development goals. They'll come back together again and say, okay, now we're doing challenging assumptions. That's the one that we're all doing together this week, and then we go off again. So I think that as you start to see that build, the organizations that are doing really, really well with it, they're building, for me, a surprisingly high utilization rate. So a lot of learning and development products, you'll do the initial course and then people forget it very quickly. And you go back to people 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 2 months later, and many, many people have not really changed as a result of that training course. What we're seeing is that the people who start the commitment in the app, 60% of them are practicing that habit. So they've gone through the learning journey and they're getting into practice. On average, if they're practicing 3.5 times in the week. So between 3 and 4 times in the week. And I think in my more pessimistic moments, I was wondering, well, maybe people are just not going to use this app. Actually, they're really using it much more than I thought they would do. And then we ask them a question when they practice. We say, how well are you progressing with the habit that you're working on? And it's on a 4-point scale. So 1 is not at all, 2 is not very well, 3 is well, and 4 is very well. And the average rating for people who are practicing is 3.7 out of 4.
Wow.
So I'm sitting there going, okay, this is really doing something. And that's where we're starting to see this really positive feedback from people. And you're starting to see real change, because a little bit like building, something out of Lego, the individual bricks are the individual habits that you're building up. But very quickly, you start to just become a more aware, a more mindful, a more coaching style leader. Because like with human coaching, very quickly as you start to become self-aware, things start to change because you change. And that's really the power of this approach. It's not somebody else doing it to you. So I come back to, that's why coaching is so powerful, because it's about the agency and the empowerment of the individual to say, look, it's up to you. No one else is going to change you. You're going to change you. If you want to progress in this organization, if you want to show up and do a great job, if you want to be considered for promotion, if you want to, be considered for the next big opportunity, then you want to become a better leader. And this is how to learn.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. Good stuff. Yeah, I just find this stuff so fascinating. I just absolutely love it. I love the tech and the obviously, the human element to this, right? That wasn't even talked about. Being a better leader is wonderful at work, but guess what? It goes home with you, right? And it translates to communication, better family units, better neighbors, better neighborhoods, better. It's really, when you look at, the statistically, so many people complain about the decline of what's the proper terminology of the family unit and respect for elders and all these things that are tossed around. Like it's all builds it back up, right? So it's absolutely brilliant. So I will have all of Gary's contacts, contact information. I have it. So anywhere you're seeing this, if you take a look under the page or scroll down, you'll certainly be able to reach out to KultraLab and get a hold of them. Is there anything you want to leave as a parting shot?
I think first one is the spelling. So you'll find KultraLab at KultraLab.com. It's spelled KultraLab.com. And in terms of UK and US, so we're live in the UK now, and we're launching pilots in the US in the next month or two. So we're very open right now to be talking to large US organizations about delivering culture. I think my parting shot comes back to the mission of the business, which is about empowering all your people to maximize their potential using the power of coaching. And for me, that's the game changer in Kultra. It's the fact that you can take the great principles of coaching and the power of coaching and deploy it right down to shop floor, to warehouse floor, to factory floor, into those very early stage managers and those people that are saying, I've never had development like this before. That's, for me, that's what's really, really exciting. So if you're in an organization where you're going, we really want to develop our people, we want something that's easy to scale, easy to roll out, and at low cost, then come and check out what we're doing at KultraLab, and we'd be delighted to have a conversation.
Amazing stuff. Perfect. Thanks for your time, Gary.
Thanks so much, Dave. Good to see you.
And see you. Talk soon.